Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Sip&Talkers, and welcome back to Sip&Talk.
Welcome back, everyone.
You know, we were talking a while back about that that feeling you get watching movies or commercials these days, the Hollywood aesthetic.
The black and white pairings, yeah.
Exactly. It's gotten to the point where it feels less like a story and more like checking a box for the DEI KPI.
Yeah.
My own kid asked me the other day, hey, do they have to be paired like that?
Right. And, you know, after that episode, the comment section was on fire. And what was so interesting is that people weren't really arguing about skin color. They were asking, what is Hollywood actually trying to do here? And that's the thing. It's not just an aesthetic choice. It's tied into this much, much bigger cultural current. I mean, probably one of the most divisive topics in America right now. DEI.
Oh, absolutely. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not just a term for, university pamphlets or HR departments anymore.
Not at all.
It's federal policy now. It's corporate strategy. It's a talking point in elections. It can literally decide if a movie gets made or a script gets approved.
So today, we figured we'd really unpack it. Why did DEI get elevated to this almost sacred status in the first place?
And why is the backlash against it so incredibly intense?
And how does that Hollywood representation we see, like the interracial couples, tie back into all of this? We connect the dots.
And just to be clear, we're not here to pick a side or to start a fight. This is Sip and Talk. We're here to, drink coffee and talk common sense.
That's the goal. Let's dig in.
Okay, so let's start with the hard numbers. When people say they feel like something is being, socially engineered, it often comes back to that visual we mentioned, the black man with the white woman.
Right.
The perception is that it just completely dominates the screen in ads and shows. So what does the actual data say? How does that compare to reality?
Okay, this is where it gets fascinating because the contrast is, it's profound. First, let's be clear. Intermarriage in the U.S. has skyrocketed. Ever since the Loving v. Virginia case in 1967, it's climbed from just 3% of newlyweds to about 17% by 2015. So 1 in 6 new marriages is interracial.
Which is huge progress. So diversity in real-life couples is a strong, verified trend.
A very strong trend. But, and this is the crucial part, the specific pairings that are driving that trend are not what you see on screen.
Okay, so what is the most common pairing?
The single most common type of intermarriage in America is between a white person and a Hispanic person.
Really?
Yeah. Consistently, year after year, that pairing makes up somewhere between 38 and 42% of all intermarriages.
Wait. Almost half of all interracial couples are white Hispanic? I mean, if you judge by primetime TV, you'd think that pairing barely exists.
They're virtually invisible in media. It's wild. Next up is white and Asian, which is around 15%.
Okay, so where do black-white couples fall in all this, the ones we see constantly?
They account for only about 11% of all intermarriages. They're not even in the top 2 most common pairings.
And if we get even more specific, the black man, white woman configuration that seems to be in every other commercial.
That specific pairing makes up only about 7% of all actual intermarriages in the country.
7. So let me get this straight. The media is heavily, heavily promoting one of the rarest combinations, the 7% group, while almost completely ignoring the most common one, the 40% group.
And that gap right there is the data point that fuels the entire critique of forced diversity. It makes people ask, is the goal to reflect reality, or is it to push a very specific, maybe aspirational kind of image?
Which brings us to the next logical question. If it's not about accurately reflecting demographics, why the focus on the black-white dynamic specifically? What's the history there?
Well, you have to connect these choices to a long history of racial anxiety in America, especially in cinema. First, to be fair, there is a real-life gender gap. Black men are about twice as likely as black women to marry someone of another race. So the black man-white woman pairing does happen more often than the reverse.
But cinematically, that pairing was basically taboo for decades, wasn't it?
A complete taboo. For the longest time, any hint of a genuine, passionate relationship between a black man and a white woman was just off limits in major films.
You mean like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Exactly. A classic example.
Yeah.
Sidney Poitier's character had to be this perfect, almost saintly figure. The film, basically drained the relationship of any real passion to make him. Well, critics at the time said a Negro. He was designed specifically not to trigger those old racist fears about black masculinity.
And that was the 60s. But it continued for a while, right? I'm thinking of the The Pelican Brief with Denzel Washington and Julia Roberts?
Yes, in the early 90s. They famously edited the kiss between them down to just a quick peck because the studio got nervous.
So the anxiety was just that high? But what about the other way around? A white man with a black woman?
Now, that's a different story. Films with that pairing, like The Bodyguard or Monsters Ball, were historically more common and commercially successful. And the sexuality was often very overt.
There was often a specific look for the black female leads in those movies too, wasn't there?
That's the key point in a lot of the analysis. Very often, the black actresses in these roles were light-skinned. The argument is that this allowed Hollywood to sort of have their cake and eat it too.
How so?
They could check the diversity box, include a person of color in a lead role, but also maintain what they saw as a safety net for mass audiences by avoiding what were perceived as the most culturally charged friction points from history.
Which brings us right back to today, because now this focus on specific pairings is often tied directly to these DEI mandates, and this is where the cultural backlash really ignites. So what are the critics actually saying? What's the philosophical problem they have with DEI?
I think the intensity of the backlash comes from the feeling that DEI policies undermine a really core American ideal, meritocracy.
The idea that the best person for the job gets the job, based purely on their skills and qualifications.
Right. Critics argue that DEI replaces that principle with identity politics, where your group identity, your race, your gender becomes a primary factor in selection, all to meet certain demographic targets.
And this gets into that really critical and often misunderstood difference between equality and equity.
Exactly. And it's so important to define them clearly. Equality, is about giving everyone the exact same opportunity, the same starting line for everyone.
Fairness of process.
Perfect way to put it. Equity, on the other hand, tries to make sure everyone reaches a similar outcome. It tries to adjust for historical disadvantages to get to the same finish line.
Fairness of outcome.
Yes. And while most people are on board with equality, there is deep, widespread resistance to equity. Critics see it as a kind of social engineering, trying to force equal results where they might not naturally occur.
And that leads to the most emotionally charged argument, which is the claim of reverse discrimination.
You hear that constantly. There's a palpable feeling from many in the majority group, especially white men, that they're being penalized, that they're losing out on jobs, promotions, or college admissions, not because they aren't qualified, but because of their identity to help a company meet a quota.
And beyond the philosophy, the way it's been implemented seems to just make everything worse. The mandatory training sessions and all that.
It's a huge problem. The execution often fails the intention. A lot of DEI training gets criticized for being, mandatory, preachy. Sometimes it frames employees as either oppressors or victims.
Which sounds like a recipe for resentment.
It can be. It causes this psychological resistance where people feel attacked, and it ends up manufacturing division instead of fostering inclusion. The whole framework then gets politicized and just becomes a shorthand for wokeism, and the conversation stops.
So you have this clear tension. The goal of DEI to correct historical imbalances and reflect a diverse world is something many people support in principle. But when it's carried out through mandates that feel like they're violating that core idea of fairness of process, it just creates this huge cultural friction.
I just want to give another shout out to Mickey from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Sip&Talk.
Welcome back. Wait, are we doing the intro again?
I don't know, it's just, it's become a habit now, I guess.
Huh. Well, the coffee has been refilled. We taken a breather?
We have. And we were just talking about how DEI seems to have gone from this moral symbol to like a public lightning rod.
Yeah, it was supposed to be about promoting diversity, equity, inclusion.
Yeah.
And now it gets more hate than plastic straws. Let's keep going.
Let's do it. We're going to keep unpacking this. Why did DEI become so, disliked, so questioned, even seen as this monster of political correctness?
And we were talking about more than just Hollywood and gaming. The backlash in the U.S. these past couple of years, is it really just politics? Or is it, like some academics are saying, that DEI, it was meant to fix inequality, but the system just It expanded out of control.
Right, and it became this low-performance department with a budget that just kept growing and growing.
Exactly.
So for this second half of our talk, we're going to keep breaking DEI down, flatten it out, and really analyze it. You ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's unpack the corporate side of this. We have this huge pile of information corporate budgets, cultural critiques, and some really volatile data from the tech and gaming worlds.
That's right. And for you listening, we're really digging into what is, I mean, you could argue it's the most controversial topic in corporate America right now. This sudden, really dramatic and widespread backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So let's just jump right into the numbers.
Okay, let's start with the budget. That's where the real decisions get made.
Always follow the money.
Exactly. And when you look at DEI, not as a philosophy, but as a cost center, the story of how it all unraveled becomes incredibly clear. It really did become a budgetary black hole.
And the timeline here is super important, isn't it?
It's crucial. Before 2020, based on all the industry data we have, the average corporate DEI budget for, say, a Fortune 1000 company was relatively modest.
Like, what are we talking?
Around $1.5 million. It was a manageable cost, something often handled by a small subcommittee in HR.
Okay, so manageable. But then 2020 happened.
And the budget just surged. I mean, the commitments became monumental.
Give us some examples of that explosion. What did it look like on the ground?
Okay, look at a giant like Walmart. In 2020, they committed $100 million to establish their Center for Racial Equity.
$100 million. Wow.
That is a 9-figure, highly publicized commitment. It was designed to signal this massive cultural investment.
$100 million is a staggering amount of money. But I guess there's a difference between a one-time commitment and a sustained operational cost, right?
Did that commitment last?
It did not. The fund was set to expire in 2025, and Walmart chose not to renew it.
Interesting.
And this isn't just one company changing its mind. You have to see it as a powerful market signal.
What's the signal?
It's basically saying, we made the massive symbolic investment. We waited for the return on that, whether it was brand loyalty or social good. And when that return didn't really materialize in a way we could measure, we quietly retired the program.
So the market saw this $100 million program just sunsetting, and they knew the tide was turning.
Precisely. And if that's what's happening in the private sector, you know the institutional bloat is even easier to track in the federal government.
Oh, for sure. Budgets there are public record. And the data on the government's expansion, I looked at some of this. It's truly shocking. It's like forensic evidence of institutional capture. We looked really closely at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, their 2025 budget proposal.
Okay.
The word DEI, or, very closely related internal terms, appeared an astounding 829 times in that one document.
829 times.
It's no longer just a policy guideline. It became the entire operating system.
So you can quantify that. What did the staffing cost look like?
Well, HHS employed 294 dedicated full-time DEI personnel. And here's the part that should make taxpayers' ears perk up. 182 of those people, well over half, were earning 6-figure salaries.
That's a bureaucratic kingdom. That's what that is. What was the top end of that salary range?
The highest paid DEI staffer at the Food and Drug Administration, which is under HHS, was making $221,000 a year. So you're absolutely right. This is a significant operational cost being dedicated to administrative functions. And it's often more than the salaries of the research scientists or the core compliance officers in the same agencies.
Which immediately raises the question of mission creep.
Right. And this expansion, it wasn't free for the next generation either. Let's talk about what some call the education tax.
The cost of mandatory DEI training and administration at universities?
It's astronomical. The cost estimates from organizations like the Goldwater Institute in 2025 are just staggering.
Oh, staggering.
Mandatory DEI courses and all their associated administrative costs across all U.S. universities are estimated to cost taxpayers and students at least $1.8 billion every 4 years.
$1.8 billion. Let's break that down. How is that money actually being spent? It can't just be the curriculum, can it?
Oh, no, not at all. That money primarily goes to 3 areas. First, you have the administrative salaries, hiring dozens of new vice presidents, associate deans, directors of DEI, all 6-figure jobs. Second, there's the cost of creating, auditing, and constantly updating the mandatory course material, which usually requires expensive external consultants.
Okay.
And third is the opportunity cost. It's faculty time being taken away from actual research and teaching to either administer or attend these mandatory training sessions. That $1.8 billion is a massive transfer of resources away from core education and into administrative bureaucracy.
So we've established this monumental, incredibly rapid surge in cost, both in corporate America and in government, which brings us to the crucial question.
Did it work?
Did this massive investment deliver any tangible, measurable results? This is the performance paradox.
And this is the absolute heart of the commercial critique. Companies didn't necessarily mind the cost if it led to a more, harmonious, innovative, or productive workplace.
Sure, that makes sense. A good investment.
But when the results came in, the corporate disappointment was palpable. You could feel it.
Yeah. So what does the actual academic research say about the effectiveness of the most common tool they used, this mandatory DEI training?
The Harvard Business Review consolidated findings from literally thousands of papers in a 2025 update. And the conclusion was, well, it was damning.
How so?
The effects of mandatory one-off DEI training often last only 1 to 2 days.
Wait. 1 to 2 days. Organizations are spending hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, on consultants for something that has the shelf life of a banana.
That's a terrifyingly accurate way to put it. And what's more, the research found that sometimes these trainings don't just fail to work, they actively backfire.
How do they backfire?
They can spark more backlash, they can increase internal resentment, and they can even institutionalize the very biases they're trying to fix because employees feel labeled or coerced or put into boxes as oppressor or victim.
So you're paying millions for a tool that's highly volatile and proven to be ineffective, which raises a pretty big question I have to ask. If the training is demonstrably ineffective and sometimes even counterproductive, why did organizations keep funding it for years?
That's the billion-dollar question.
What internal psychological thing was stronger than the budget spreadsheet?
That is the very essence of institutional capture and the sacred cow phenomena.
Sacred cow.
Yeah. Once DEI became an established department, it sort of shifted from being a tool for, say, fair hiring practices to becoming a signal. The budget wasn't funding performance anymore, it was funding moral legitimacy. So if a company cut its DEI budget, regardless of how it was performing, they risked being branded as racist or backward by the press, by activist employees, and importantly, by their own investors who were using these ESG scores.
So the DEI department started to exist solely to justify their own necessity. They became this organizational shield against criticism, even if they were actively failing to improve the workplace.
That's it, exactly. And we saw this play out dramatically during the big tech layoffs of 2024 and 2025.
Right, when they were gutting whole teams.
Exactly. When engineering teams and highly profitable product lines were being cut, DEI positions were often the last to go. Or companies just got clever and quietly rebranded them.
How do you rebrand a whole department? That sounds like classic bureaucratic shuffling.
They just changed the title, not the function. They'd swap out Chief Diversity Officer for something like Talent Development Manager or Head of Employee Experience or Inclusion Strategy Lead.
Oh, I see.
It was a pretty transparent attempt to shield that budget line from the layoff acts. It told everyone that they couldn't be seen cutting the symbol, even if the function itself was redundant and costing a lot of money.
It's the ultimate example of form over function. So the political accelerator, then? That must have been a huge relief for the C-suite.
It provided the political cover they needed, and we have to stress this. The rot had already set in. Poor ROI, rising lawsuits, internal frustration. It was all there.
But then came the catalyst.
Yes. President Trump's executive order on January 20th, 2025, which terminated all radical and wasteful DEI programs and shut down the chief diversity officer positions in the federal government. That was the big one.
It essentially gave the private sector permission to act.
Precisely. The signal was unambiguous. It said that prioritizing fiscal sense over ideological fear was now politically safe.
And the reaction was immediate.
Almost immediate. Major Fortune 500 companies, Amazon, Meta, Boeing, Ford, Target, they all started announcing adjustments to their DEI strategies.
Adjustments, which is corporate speak for we're finally bringing fiscal responsibility back to this department.
Yes, and they were already facing a rising tide of legal challenges, especially after the Supreme Court's decisions on affirmative action. That created real legal risk for a lot of their DEI mandates.
Yes, plus shareholder pushback.
Exactly. They were already dealing with shareholder proposals pushing back on ESG. The political move it stepped on the thing that was already rotten. It allowed corporations to prioritize the spreadsheet without facing a massive PR disaster.
So a failure of organization that came long before the political shift.
But the political shift made the inevitable corrections swift and public.
Okay, let's pivot now. From the budgets and bureaucracy to the cultural realm, which is where a lot of the emotional resistance really builds up, we need to understand why mandatory diversity, specifically in media and advertising, seem to actively alienate the audience instead of engaging them.
The core issue here is it's storytelling integrity versus just formulaic compliance. Any good story requires what they call the suspension of disbelief.
Right. The audience agrees to buy into the fictional world for a little while.
Exactly. And when that world starts feeling manufactured or statistically impossible, that contract between the storyteller and the audience is broken.
And the audience feels manipulated, not entertained. So what's the most high-profile example of this statistical violation that people point to?
It is overwhelmingly the black male-white female pairing in media, specifically in ads, TV dramas, and high-budget streaming shows.
And look, interracial pairings are a wonderful, normal part of the real world.
Of course, but it's the sheer frequency of this one specific pairing in modern media that started to trigger the resistance.
How does that frequency compare to, real-world statistics?
Well, in media today, this pairing often shows up in something like 30 to 40% of relationship portrayals, especially in commercials.
That seems high.
It's very high. In contrast, in the real world, this is a relatively low-frequency pairing. For example, white-Hispanic pairings, which are statistically far more common in the U.S., are almost invisible in media.
So when the audience sees this statistically rare pairing over and over and over again, and it's always portrayed in the same sanitized way.
Right. Always conflict-free, perfectly harmonious, effortlessly middle class.
They get kicked out of the story.
Absolutely. The audience stops seeing a potential romantic relationship and starts seeing a political puppet show designed to tick an ideological box.
And true diversity in a story should bring friction, right? It should bring conflict and genuine cultural differences. When I think of movies like Loving, or The Complexity in Get Out.
Those are perfect examples. But this formulaic DEI approach, it flattens the characters, it flattens the relationship, it makes it all feel superficial and just performative.
And this ties directly into this idea of selective historical compensation. It feels like the media focused on compensating for one specific historical trauma, but then just ignored all the others.
That's the key analytical point right there. Historically, media propagated the myth of the black brute, which was this deeply offensive trope that presented black men as sexual threats.
Right.
The current media strategy seems to be a massive overcorrection designed to compensate solely for that one specific trauma.
So what does that overcorrection look like on screen?
It results in the consistent portrayal of black men as, well, flawless, gentle, highly intellectual saviors who exist mainly to protect or elevate a white female protagonist. They're often shown with this perfect middle-class respectability, seamlessly fitting into white society without any friction. It's a beautiful fantasy, but the repetition makes it feel less like life and more like an ideological correction.
But if the goal is truly diversity, if it's about fixing all historical imbalances, why is the compensation so narrowly focused? Why create a new hierarchy where some groups are left out?
Because resources and focus are finite, and the ideological goal became very singular. And so other groups' historical traumas were either neglected or tragically reinforced by old stereotypes that those communities have been fighting for decades.
Why is only one specific pairing or group put at the top of the compensation pyramid?
While other minority groups are either invisible or stuck in old offensive tropes?
Yeah, the whole process stops feeling like equity and starts feeling like a selective ideological priority.
And that creates a new kind of resentment, and you have this powerful irony of progressive ideology being implemented most aggressively by massive global corporations, Disney, Netflix, Amazon, and the giant asset managers behind them.
The ultimate partnership between capital and ideology.
Wall Street and Silicon Valley elites are funding this narrative. They get to claim moral superiority and a progressive brand image by bankrolling these mandates. They put the diverse couple in the $5 million ad campaign while they themselves continue to live in and send their kids to schools in communities that remain overwhelmingly homogenous.
And that hypocrisy, it breeds incredible resentment among working and middle-class consumers who feel like they're being lectured to and, in a narrative sense, replaced.
And their anger often gets redirected, not at the diverse couple on the screen, but at the perceived hypocritical elite pushing this agenda from their ivory towers.
It's moral signaling on the cheap for the wealthy, who are totally insulated from any of the social consequences of these narratives.
And speaking of social consequences, we have to talk about the really sensitive, rarely stated issue that affects female viewers.
This is the hidden backlash, the part related to dating market expectations. This is where the narrative leaps off the screen and into real life.
It's a very difficult conversation to have, but the data is there. Female viewers, particularly white and Asian women, are being constantly fed this highly polished, idealized fantasy of the perfect black male partner through the media.
And this raises their expectations for real-life partners, either consciously or unconsciously.
Exactly. And what happens to the men from their own communities, white men or Asian men, who are simultaneously being portrayed as weak, nerdy, or undesirable in that same media?
They get sidelined. The narrative is effectively altering perceptions of desirability.
And we see this mirrored in dating app data. Research on major platforms like Tinder and Hinge showed that white women's preference and match rates for Asian and Indian men decreased significantly in the years right after that 2020 media shift.
And at the same time?
At the same time, their match rates for black men saw a notable increase.
That's fascinating. It suggests that the media narrative, this fictional world created by selective compensation, it is powerful enough to alter real-world dating preferences and social structures.
It links the cultural backlash directly back to personal frustration. If you feel like your media is simultaneously pushing an aggressive aesthetic of who is desirable while degrading your own identity or community,
the rejection of that media is inevitable.
Right. And this brings us to the ultimate long-term consequence. The difference between normalization and obsession.
True inclusion is subtle. It's when diversity just exists naturally in a story, and the audience accepts it without even thinking about it.
Yes. Obsession is when it becomes a forced, required tag.
The black-white pairing became a mandatory tag in everything. Every ad, every streaming original, even in historical fantasy settings like The Witcher or Lord of the Rings that are not based on modern America.
It's like the chocolate analogy. If you love chocolate, but you are forced to eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day, you get sick of it. You stop loving it.
Right.
DEI's failure was doing too much, too deliberately, too selectively. It turned potential supporters into opponents who are just fatigued by the constant political signaling.
The failure isn't the presence of diversity. It's the obsession with making sure that presence is noticed, checked off, and prioritized over the quality of the story.
And when a diverse pairing becomes a political symbol rather than just a possible romantic option, it stops being romance and becomes propaganda.
And that transition is what killed the audience's investment in the story. They stop watching. They start boycotting.
Which leads us directly to the marketplace that tracks those failures with brutal efficiency. The gaming industry.
Oh yeah. Gaming is the most volatile test market for any cultural product. Players vote instantly and brutally with their wallets, with concurrent user counts, and with their refund buttons.
It's a pure numbers business.
If the game is fundamentally bad, no amount of positive press or ideological signaling is going to save it.
You absolutely cannot hide organizational or creative failure in gaming. Let's look at what is maybe the most spectacular commercial disaster of 2024.
Okay, give us the hard numbers on that flop.
Concord was supposed to be a major hero shooter IP. It's estimated to have cost Sony upwards of $400 million in development, marketing, and operational startup.
$400 million, and it was positioned to compete with the big guys.
Exactly. And what was the key feature that drew immediate controversy right from the pre-launch marketing?
The focus was aggressively on character diversity, often overshadowing any talk about the core gameplay.
The protagonist roster featured characters specifically designed to check multiple identity boxes. For example, an obese black woman, prominently featured trans characters, and a heavy emphasis on non-binary pronouns in all the marketing.
A clear attempt to create a perfect aesthetic of inclusion.
Yes. And the result of this, hundreds of millions of dollars investment.
Total commercial and operational failure. It was shut down and refunded within 2 weeks of launch.
And its peak concurrent user count on Steam was under 700 people. You heard that right? 700.
Under 700. That's an unprecedented failure for a flagship IP from a studio as massive as Sony.
That's less than the daily user count for some niche 10-year-old indie game. The player verdict was crystal clear.
And it was savage, but it was consistent.
Media analysis confirmed the feeling on the ground. The game had a heavy DEI focus, light on actual gameplay.
So the core player critique wasn't, we hate diverse characters.
No, it was, We hate being fed propaganda instead of a fun game. The quality was demonstrably sacrificed for the political shield.
This kind of spectacular commercial failure brings us to the specific institutional capture mechanism in gaming, the narrative consultant.
Yeah.
We have to talk about Sweet Baby Inc.
SBI is a Canadian narrative consulting firm, and they were hired by many of the biggest AAA studios like Insomniac for Spider-Man 2, Santa Monica for God of War, Remedy for Alan Wake 2.
And their stated mission
is to ensure diversity and non-offense in the story, the dialogue, and the character designs.
This led to what a lot of people are calling Gamergate 2.0. Tell us about the mechanism the players use to push back.
In 2024, a Steam curator list titled Sweet Baby Inc. Detected just went viral overnight. It gained hundreds of thousands of followers almost instantly.
And this list just marked every game that had hired SBI.
That's all it did. It became an ideological filtering tool for millions of consumers.
That's a direct, organized, and really effective market boycott tool. Players are actively researching which games have been touched by these consultants before they spend $70.
Absolutely. And by 2025, this had exploded. We now see dozens of these curated lists, DEI detected, ESG detected, woke, or nope. Players use them as a standard pre-purchase check.
So the player community views these external consultants not as creative partners.
Not at all. They see them as creative censors, prioritizing a political agenda over the artistic freedom and narrative integrity you need for engaging complex games.
What are some specific examples of those creative costs? How did these consultants supposedly change the stories?
Well, the fear of offense led to self-censorship, which SBI then reinforced. For example, in Alan Wake 2, the portrayal of diverse characters had to be sanitized to remove any potential ambiguities or conflicts that could lead to a social media backlash.
And in other games?
In games like God of War, there are reports that complex mythological themes that might be deemed problematic today were either softened or just scrubbed entirely to meet modern sensibilities.
So the result is this homogenized, bland, risk-averse narrative where characters are just perfect symbols instead of flawed, interesting people.
Exactly.
So the players feel their art form is being dictated by political commissars who prioritize safety over art. But why were the studios hiring these consultants in the first place if they knew the creative risk?
That takes us right back to our first segment, ESG leverage. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, along with other giants like Vanguard, used their massive voting power to enforce ESG environmental, social, governance, and DEI scores.
They held the corporate whip.
Precisely. If major publishers, Sony, Microsoft, EA, Ubisoft, if they didn't hit specific mandatory DEI compliance targets, BlackRock would threaten their investment or vote down their leadership proposals at shareholder meetings.
So this directly coerced publishers into mandatory compliance. It forced them to hire consultants like SBI or institute their own internal DEI checks.
It did.
Yeah.
And this means BlackRock was directly responsible for forcing some highly questionable decisions, like demanding female custodians, a historically all-male, lore-heavy military order, be inserted into the Warhammer 40K universe.
And they absolutely exerted that influence, forcing internal lore changes that risk massive backlash from the dedicated fan base.
All in the name of ticking an ESG box. But here is the massive inflection point. BlackRock's great reversal in 2025.
What was this abrupt shift?
BlackRock suddenly announced internally that they were canceling mandatory DEI targets for their portfolio companies. They cited increasing legal risk and political pressure in the U.S.
That shift is enormous. It means the single largest financial entity is no longer conditioning investment on hitting specific DEI quotas.
The financial pressure is gone.
Which means the corporate cover is gone.
And that reversal signals what people are predicting will be the DEI Great Purge in gaming. Publishers are now expected to quietly ditch these expensive, creativity-stifling consultants because the big money no longer requires them to maintain a favorable investment score.
Commercial reality is now free to reassert itself.
It is.
Let's focus on that creative cost, though. Sacrificing art for safety. Because that's the real tragedy in all this.
The fear of a social media storm. A single tweet from some niche activist group leading to outrage, it caused developers to engage in this paralyzing internal self-censorship.
They started avoiding conflict, nuance, anything challenging that might offend.
Which led to conservative, risk-averse content. The result is narrative safety, which is just another word for creative stagnation. And
the players noticed the drop in quality immediately. Do we have hard data on how players feel about this?
We do. A Newzoo survey from 2023 found that 62% of players believe that DEI policies actively damage game quality.
62%.
And another leaked Steam internal survey in 2024 revealed that 55% of players felt that games were becoming too politically correct. The message is unambiguous. Players prioritize compelling, high-quality content over ideological signaling.
And the proof, as always, is in the sales figures. Contrast the catastrophic flops with the hits that just ignored the DEI mandate.
The proof is undeniable. Look at Dustborn. It peaked at 83 users, conquered at 697. Commercial zeros.
No failures.
Then look at the massive global successes that prioritize pure gameplay and artistic vision without bowing to these consulting pressures. Black Myth. Wukong sold 10 million copies in its first week. Palworld sold 25 million copies in a few weeks.
The market rewards quality and authenticity, not compliance.
The go woke, go broke lesson is just brutally reinforced in this sector.
And finally, there's the internal talent flow issue. When identity is prioritized over merit, the best people start to walk.
This is the invisible quality killer. Veteran developers are reporting instances of reverse discrimination in hiring and promotion, where identity traits overshadow merit, skill, and experience.
And this causes highly experienced veteran talent to just leave the AAA space altogether.
Which impacts the technical and narrative quality of major releases. When you prioritize a bureaucratic checklist over proven talent, your product quality suffers irrevocably. It ensures the next release is worse than the last.
The gaming industry's lesson is the most direct and the most painful to the bottom line. Quality is king.
And players will not buy a broken product just because it carries a moral symbol.
Okay. This talk has taken us through the organizational, the cultural, and the commercial reasons behind the 2024-2025 backlash against DEI. And the findings are surprisingly consistent across all three areas.
The core thesis is really this. DEI was killed by a perfect storm of political acceleration and its own spectacular organizational failure. It sort of died from over-success in its bureaucracy and poor execution in its delivery.
It wasn't a rejection of the idea of inclusion. It was a potent, market-driven rejection of the forced, metric-driven bureaucratic implementation.
The rigid checklist, whether you apply it to corporate budgets, Hollywood casting, or game development, it prioritized satisfying an external compliance mandate over delivering quality, ROI, or narrative integrity.
And we've seen that independent critical thinking and objective analysis of systems are just essential, regardless of how high-minded the initial moral appeal of that system was.
When a good intention becomes a runaway, self-justifying mechanism, a sacred cow, it's destined for systemic failure.
So we'll leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to consider until our next chat.
Think deeply about the difference between natural inclusion and forced compliance. Natural inclusion is when a diverse character is just inherently part of a great story, fully realized and complex. Their identity enhances the plot without being the entire point. They earn their place.
Versus forced compliance, where the character exists only as a symbolic shield, placed strategically to protect a bad product or a hollow corporation from criticism.
For DEI to ever regain public acceptance, it has to move away from being a mandatory political symbol and go back to being a natural, authentic reflection of humanity's true complexity.
We really hope this discussion has provided objective facts and data points to encourage critical and independent thought in what is often a very noisy and polarized debate.
We want to say that this discussion was objective and provided facts without criticism or discrimination toward any group or nation.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Sip and Talk. If you value this type of in-depth, fact-based analysis, please take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast wherever you find quality stuff to listen to.
And hey, check out our friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got some really fun memes and travel vlogs. It's great.
Yeah, lots of fun stuff over there. We'll chat with you next time.
Take care.